I was the family's golden child, until I refused to fund my brother's gambling addiction. There was a time when I believed my family's love was unconditional, that the admiration in my parents' eyes, the pride in their voices whenever they spoke about me, was something real, something permanent. I had spent years, my entire life really, being the person they could rely on, the one who always made the right choices, the one who never disappointed them. I was their success story, the child they paraded around at family gatherings, the name they dropped in conversations to prove what an amazing job they had done as parents. But love in my family had always been transactional, and I didn't realize it until I finally said no. It started with a phone call. I had been sitting in my apartment, sifting through emails, drowning in deadlines, when my mother's name flashed across the screen. I answered without hesitation, a smile already forming on my lips. "Hey, Mom." She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your brother needs help." I blinked, my fingers tightening around the phone. Of course he does. "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. It was always the same story, the same disaster on repeat. A hesitant sigh, then the inevitable. He got into some trouble again, with gambling. I closed my eyes, the muscles in my jaw tensed. "How much?" 20,000. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to remain calm, to not react the way every instinct in my body was telling me to. $20,000. "He promised this is the last time," she continued, her voice soft, coaxing, the way it always was when she was trying to get me to bend. "He just needs a little help getting back on his feet. You know how hard things have been for him lately." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, because he keeps doing this. Because every time he loses, he comes crying to you. And instead of letting him deal with the consequences, you bail him out. And now you want me to bail him out too?" A beat of silence, then a shift. "This is what family does," she said, her voice sharper now, tinged with something dangerously close to expectation. "We help each other." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "No, Mom, I help, over and over again, and he keeps throwing it away. He's your brother, and I'm not his ATM." Silence. The shift in her tone was so sudden, so chillingly disappointed, that I felt it like a slap. "I didn't think you'd be so selfish," she muttered, the warmth in her voice disappearing, replaced with something icy, something unfamiliar. "I thought you cared about this family." My stomach twisted, but I refused to let the guilt settle. Not this time. "I do care," I said, my voice steady. "That's why I won't do this anymore." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And then she hung up. No goodbye. No last attempt to convince me, just click. And I knew, in that moment, that something had changed. I just didn't realize how bad it was going to get. The first real sign that I had been exiled came 2 days later. I had texted my father, just a simple message, asking how he was doing. Usually he responded within minutes. But this time, nothing. Hours passed, then a full day. I called. It rang once, then went to voicemail. The next morning I tried again. This time, the number had been blocked. I stared at the screen, disbelief tightening in my chest. They were really doing this. I had spent my entire life being the child they adored, the one they counted on, the golden one. But now, the moment I refused to be their financial safety net, the moment I decided to put myself first, I was nothing to them. And that was just the beginning. The next family gathering was a disaster before I even walked through the door. I should have known better than to go. Should have realized that my invitation, sent at the last minute, as if I were an afterthought, was nothing more than a trap. But some small, stupid part of me still hoped. Hoped that they would understand. That they would see my side. That, at the very least, they wouldn't hate me for refusing to throw 20 grand into a black hole. I was wrong. The moment I stepped into my parents' house, I felt the shift. The conversations that had once paused in excitement when I entered, now continued as if I were invisible. The smiles that had once been reserved just for me were gone, replaced by cold glances and whispers I wasn't meant to hear. And then, of course, there was my brother. He sat in the center of the room like a fallen prince, slouched in his chair, his face drawn with artificial regret. He looked up at me, and instead of guilt, I saw resentment. "Look who finally decided to show up," he said, voice laced with mockery. "I thought you were too good for us now." I clenched my jaw. "Don't do that." "Do what?" He spread his arms, his lips curling into something ugly. "Remind everyone how you turned your back on your own family?" I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. "I didn't turn my back on anyone," I said calmly. "I just refused to keep enabling your mess." His face darkened. "Wow. You really think you're better than us, huh?" And then my mother, my own mother, sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "I don't know what happened to you," she muttered. "You used to be so kind." I stared at her. "Kind? You mean obedient?" Her lips pursed. "You always used to take care of this family. But now?" She let out a sad little laugh, one that sent something sharp through my ribs. "Now you only care about yourself," I laughed. A short, sharp sound. "You mean I'm not letting myself be used?" Gasps, murmurs. My father, who had been silent this entire time, finally spoke. "We're disappointed in you," he said simply. I looked at him, at all of them, at the people who had once made me feel like I was the center of their world. And now, because I had refused to throw my own life away for someone else's mistakes, I was the villain. I took a deep breath. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm disappointed in you." And then I walked away. Leaving that house should have felt like freedom. The weight of my family's rejection should have slid off my shoulders like a discarded coat, allowing me to breathe. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, my hands clenched at my sides, my chest felt tighter than ever. It wasn't sadness, not really. It wasn't even regret. It was rage. Fury at the sheer audacity of it all. At the way they had looked at me, not with disappointment or heartbreak, but disgust. Like I had failed them. Like I had betrayed them. They had convinced themselves that I was the villain, that I was the selfish one, when the truth was so obvious it was almost laughable. I had done nothing but give my entire life. I had played the role of the perfect child, the reliable one, the golden one, because I had been trained to believe that was the price of love. And now that I had drawn a line, I was nothing to them. A bitter laugh slipped past my lips as I walked to my car, the dull hum of distant traffic filling the silence. I could still hear their voices in my head, my mother's wounded disappointment, my father's cold condemnation, my brother's smug, entitled anger. I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary as I pulled away from the curb. Fine. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, I'd let them, because I was done being their savior. The fallout came faster than I expected. The next morning, my phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, some pretending to be neutral, others outright accusing me of abandoning my family in their time of need. "Aunt Lisa, I don't know what happened between you and your parents, but maybe you should just help your brother this one time. Family is everything. Cousin Daniel." "Damn, man. You're really letting a little money come between you and blood? That's cold. Grandma, I raised you better than this. I'm ashamed." I stared at the screen, my fingers twitching with the urge to respond, to explain, to make them understand. But they wouldn't, because none of them had ever been in my position. None of them had spent their entire lives being the backbone, the emergency fund, the responsible one who was expected to clean up everyone else's mess. They didn't see the pattern. They didn't see the damage. They only saw what they wanted to see. I tossed the phone onto my bed, exhaling slowly. This was going to get worse before it got better. By the end of the week, my parents had completely rewritten history. I wasn't their devoted, hard-working child anymore. I was greedy, ungrateful, a selfish, heartless disappointment who had turned their back on family over money. And the worst part? People believed them. Friends I had known since childhood started acting different. Work colleagues who had always been warm and friendly now kept their distance, their smiles polite but thin. It didn't take long to figure out why. My mother, sweet, loving, nurturing, had been busy spinning a tale of heartbreak and betrayal, making sure everyone knew just how deeply I had hurt them. They weren't asking me for money, she told them. They just wanted my support, my love. But I had abandoned them. I had walked away. And the world, eager for a villain, ate it up. 2 weeks after the confrontation, my father finally broke his silence. I had been expecting something dramatic, a confrontation, an explosion, maybe even a full-blown screaming match outside my apartment. But instead, his retaliation came in the form of something colder. I found out through a distant cousin that my parents were cutting me out of the will. Not that I had ever asked for anything, not that I had ever expected an inheritance, but the message was clear. You are no longer one of us. I was excommunicated, banished, not for some unforgivable crime, not for betraying them, but for daring to say no, for choosing myself, for refusing to be the sacrifice they expected me to be. I sat with that realization for a long time, staring at the legal notice confirming my erasure from the family's affairs, my fingers tracing the sharp edges of the paper. I should have felt devastated, but all I felt was light. They had spent years controlling me with conditional love, wielding approval like a leash, keeping me tethered with the promise that as long as I stayed useful, I would be cherished. But now, they had no power over me. They thought they were punishing me, but really, they had set me free. The final test came in the form of a desperate voicemail. I had blocked most of my family by then, but somehow my brother found a way through. His voice was slurred, thick with exhaustion and desperation. "You're really gonna do this to me?" He spat, anger bleeding into his words. "After everything? You think you're so much better than us, don't you?" A ragged breath, a pause, then something softer. "I messed up. I know I did, but I need help." Silence stretched, then, "I need you." My throat tightened. For a split second, the old guilt threatened to creep in, whispering in the back of my mind, reminding me of all the times I had fixed things before. But then I remembered. I remembered every time I had saved him, only for him to turn around and do it again. I remembered the years of sacrifices that had never been acknowledged. I remembered my mother's voice, calling me selfish because I had dared to set a boundary. I pressed delete, and I felt no guilt at all. Months passed. The family that had once put me on a pedestal had fully erased me from their world. No birthday calls, no holiday invitations, no passive-aggressive texts pretending everything was fine. I had officially become a stranger to them. And you know what? I thrived. Without their expectations weighing me down, without the constant guilt of being needed, I built a life that was truly mine. I went back to school, traveled, made real friends, ones who didn't just value me for what I could give. And while they were still stuck in their never-ending cycle of self-inflicted misery, waiting for their next scapegoat, I was out in the world, free, whole, untouchable. It was strange, really. I had no obligations, no frantic late-night calls demanding I fix something, no sinking feeling in my gut every time my phone buzzed, no weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders, suffocating me with expectations I never agreed to carry. And yet, even with the silence, even with the distance, I could still feel them, like ghosts haunting the edges of my mind, lingering in the spaces they used to occupy. My mother's voice, thick with disappointment. My father's cold dismissal. My brother's endless demands. They were gone, exiling me from their world the way I had once feared they would. But instead of grief, I felt something else. Relief. Pure, undeniable relief. At first I thought maybe they would come around. Not with apologies. No, I knew them better than that. But with something, a half-hearted attempt at reconciliation, a manipulative gesture disguised as peace, because that was how they operated, wasn't it? They never let me stray too far. They never let their golden child wander too long without reminding me why I needed them. So I waited. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the silence stretched on. Not one word. Not from my mother, the woman who used to call me every single day just to check in, just to remind me how much I meant to her, so long as I was useful. Not from my father, the man who once beamed when he spoke about me, proudly telling anyone who would listen how much I had accomplished, before deciding I was nothing more than a selfish disappointment. Not even from my brother, the one who had taken from me more times than I could count, who had never once hesitated to guilt me, to manipulate me, to remind me that helping family was a duty I could never escape. Nothing. It was as if I had died. And the strangest part? I was okay with it. Then, the unexpected happened. A letter. An actual physical letter, tucked neatly inside my mailbox, my name scrawled in my mother's careful handwriting. I stood in my kitchen, the envelope resting on the counter like it was something poisonous, something volatile. My fingers hovered over the seal, hesitant, conflicted. Did I even want to know what she had to say? Curiosity won. I slid my finger under the flap, tearing it open, unfolding the neatly written pages inside. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of guilt, or regret, or even an acknowledgement of what they had done. It was a plea, a desperate, last-ditch effort to manipulate me back into their lives. I know things have been difficult between us, it began, her tone carefully crafted to sound gentle, understanding. And I know you must feel hurt. But we are still your family. We always will be. I scoffed, shaking my head. Funny that. Your brother is in a bad place again. He's lost everything. The people he owes money to. They're not the kind you ignore. He needs help, and we don't know what to do anymore. My grip tightened on the paper. Of course, this was why they were reaching out. Not because they missed me. Not because they realized what they had done. Not because they wanted to fix anything, but because they needed something. Because their lives had gone up in flames, and they were looking for someone to take the fall. And once again, they had turned to me. I don't want to lose you over this. We never wanted to hurt you. But we are struggling, and we need you now more than ever. Please call me. I let the letter fall to the counter, my chest tightening, not with guilt, not with sadness, but with rage. They still didn't get it. They still thought I was the same person, the same obedient child who would drop everything to rescue them from their own mistakes. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't respond at all. And that silence? It must have driven them insane. Because a week later, my father showed up at my door. I hadn't seen him in nearly 6 months. Not since that last family gathering, when he had sat there, silent and unyielding, watching as my mother and brother tore into me. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He looked tired, older, his face lined with something I had never seen before. Desperation. "Can we talk?" he asked. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. "About what?" His jaw tightened. "About your family." I let out a short laugh. "I don't think I have one." A flicker of something crossed his expression, but he recovered quickly. "This has gone on long enough." I arched a brow. "Has it?" He exhaled sharply. "Your mother wrote to you. Did you even bother to read it?" I gestured toward the crumpled letter on my counter. "Oh, I read it. And I loved the part where she guilt-tripped me while pretending it wasn't guilt-tripping. Very classic." His hands clenched at his sides. "She's trying to fix this." "No," I corrected. "She's trying to fix my brother's problems by dragging me down with them. There's a difference." His lips pressed into a thin line. "We just need—" I held up a hand. "Don't. I already know what you're going to say." I tilted my head, studying him. "Tell me something, Dad. If I had given in the first time you asked for money, would you have cut me off like you did? Or would I still be the perfect child in your eyes?" Silence. A long, telling silence. His face was unreadable, but the answer was there. I smiled, slow and sharp. "That's what I thought." I started to close the door, but his hand shot out, gripping the edge. His voice dropped. "Your brother is in real trouble." I met his gaze, unflinching. "So am I. If I go back now, if I help now, I lose everything. And you know it." His nostrils flared, his grip tightened. And then, finally, he let go. I saw it in his eyes. The realization, the understanding that I wasn't going to bend this time, that he had lost me. Without another word, I shut the door in his face. That was the last time I ever saw him, the last time I ever spoke to any of them. Months passed, then years. I built my life, brick by brick, away from their chaos. I thrived. And my brother? He fell. Hard. The last I heard, he had been arrested for fraud, scamming people out of money when he could no longer gamble. My parents tried to save him, of course, draining what little they had left. But it wasn't enough. It never would be. Because they had built their entire world on the idea that I would always be there to fix it. I still remember the last time I shut the door on my father. I knew it was over. Not just the argument, not just the fight over my brother, but everything. It was the final, irreversible break. The moment where whatever fragile thread still connected me to them snapped under the weight of too many betrayals, too much expectation, and a lifetime of conditional love. And yet, for days after, I still found myself waiting for the next move. Because that's how it had always worked, hadn't it? The cycle of conflict, guilt, manipulation, and forced reconciliation. The inevitable moment when they would come back, not to apologize, not to change, but to pull me back in. But this time, no call came, no emails, no letters, just silence. I wasn't sure if that should have felt like victory or loss. Maybe both. Time moved on without them. At first it was strange, like stepping into a life that didn't quite fit yet. I had spent so long structuring my world around their needs, their expectations, their approval, that without them, I wasn't entirely sure who I was supposed to be. But slowly, I figured it out. I poured myself into my career, finally chasing the things I wanted instead of what would make my parents proud at the next family gathering. I took risks, made connections, built something that was mine and mine alone. I had peace, no frantic phone calls, no last-minute financial rescues, no suffocating guilt pressing down on my shoulders every time I thought about putting myself first. Just freedom. And it tasted good. I never expected to hear from them again. But then, nearly 3 years later, a message arrived. It wasn't from my mother, or my father, or even my brother. It was from a distant relative, an aunt I had barely spoken to in years. Aunt Linda, I don't know if you've heard, but your father passed away. Thought you should know. I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over, waiting for them to sink in. He was gone, just like that. No warning, no build-up, no last words exchanged, just gone. And the strangest part? I felt nothing. No sadness, no grief, no sense of loss clawing at my chest, just a dull, empty understanding that the chapter had officially, irreversibly closed. I exhaled slowly, setting my phone down on the table, staring blankly at the wall. Then, a few moments later, I picked it back up and typed out my response. Me. Thanks for letting me know. That was it. No questions, no attempts at reuniting, just closure. The funeral was small. I didn't go. Not out of spite. Not because I wanted to make a statement, but because I owed them nothing. And from what I heard later, my absence was barely acknowledged. My mother, still bitter, had convinced herself that I had been the ungrateful child, the one who had abandoned them in their time of need. And my brother? Well, he didn't show up either. Turns out, he had hit rock bottom. Again. Last I heard, he was bouncing between odd jobs, barely scraping by, still chasing the same destructive habits that had landed him in trouble time and time again. My mother had tried to save him, had spent everything she had left trying to pull him out of the hole he had dug himself into. But just like always, he had taken and taken until she had nothing left to give. And then, he left her behind. Funny how things worked out. A year passed, then 2, and with every month that went by they became less and less real to me, like echoes of a past life, like characters in a book I had once read but no longer remembered in detail. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't waiting for apologies that would never come, or justice that would never be served. Because none of it mattered anymore. I had won. Not in the way they had once defined success, not with money or accolades or the empty praise they had showered on me when I was still their golden child, but because I was happy. Genuinely, truly, peacefully happy. And for people like them, that was the worst kind of victory. The last time I thought about my family, really thought about them, was on a quiet evening years later, sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I wondered for a brief moment, if my mother still thought about me, if my brother ever regretted anything, if, in some alternate timeline, there was a version of us that had turned out different, but then, just as quickly as the thought came, it passed, because that version of us didn't exist, and the one that did was nothing more than a story I had finally finished telling.